Hey, great to have you here. Back today with another One Piece card game video. I've done videos previously talking about playing the game, as well as my most recent video opening up a booster box of packs. And today I want to talk about my current collection at this point in time. So I've only been playing the game for about a month or so I don't have the most wide array of cards in my collection, but I wanted to share the top 5 cards in my collection. And that's the cards that I think are the coolest. They're not necessarily the most valuable ones, but there is probably somewhat of a correlation between value and the ones I did wind up selecting. And in the comments below, if you want to share the top 5 cards in your collection, we'd love to see that, as far as maybe how you came about them, whether it was pulling from a box or picking up a single. It's always cool to hear people's stories about how they got their cards and what cards they ultimately do have in their collection. So, as I said, starting with number 5 here, and I'll give a little bit of a backstory about each of them. So when we started playing the game, I picked up a few starter decks and grabbed a box of OP7 as well that first day. Wound up going back to actually pick that up. And I'll talk about that one a little bit later in this list here, but last week there was a restock of OP 1, 2, 3, and 5. Picked up a box of each, and I was mostly interested in OP 1 and 5. OP 1 being the first box to come out. I felt like that had the most nostalgia history there. So grab that. And then OP5 is the first anniversary set, and that's supposed to have the greatest cards in it. There's 3 mangas and so forth, so there's a lot of great value that you can pull from that set ultimately. Didn't have the best luck with OP1 and 5, so wound up going back and getting another box of each and still didn't have great luck. So I've struck out a couple times with OP1 and 5. Hopefully at some point maybe we'll get a little bit better luck, but for the sake of today's video, I actually have a card to share from the second box of OP1 that we got, and that is the Alt Art Leader King. I just think this guy looks super cool. I love how in the Alt Art Leaders they have a lot of them have the zoomed in face version of what the regular leader looks like, as well as the holographics there as well. So hopefully you can see that pretty well. I know there's a bit of a glare or reflection, but just a cool card to have. And I don't know if he's necessarily somebody that's super played a lot. I've never played against him when I've played casually, but I'll just go through kind of the description of what the card is as well for the sake of sharing. So this is, as mentioned, a leader card, 5,000 power, 5 life, and its ability is, on your turn, if you have 10 Dawn cards on your field, give all of your opponent characters minus 1,000 power. That's one that feels like a little bit challenging to pull off and find value from. I realize purple specifically likes to do Dawn manipulation, so maybe they can ramp up to 10 Dawn faster than on their 5th turn or so. So it's possible you could get value from that, but seeing that card in the description as far as how challenging it is to get to that point and then the payoff of when you ultimately do, I could see why it's not played a lot, especially if you're playing purple, you're probably dumping Dawn back to your deck. So even if you hit that point, you're probably going to be away from it at some point again. So cool looking card. As far as playability, may not be the strongest, but I just like the visual of King. And as far as my background with the IP, I am still relatively early on in the anime. I watched the live action and so forth, so a lot of these characters I don't necessarily have their backstory, but that's somewhat of the fun, is just seeing the card, liking the character, and then you eventually get to them in the show, and I imagine, and it's going to be a little bit interesting to see, oh, I know that character, he does this in the card game, and I feel like that's going to be an interesting experience seeing them in the anime after pulling the cards. From there, we have number 4. So I mentioned OP7 was the very first booster box I ever opened, and we had the best luck. So the OP7 box that we opened, the very first one, was the best box I've opened at this point in time. And one of the reasons for that is the Alt Art Ace card that we pulled from that one. So this is an STC card, and as I said, it's an Alt Art version of Ace. Just a very cool aesthetic. I feel like OP7, Ace, and Sabo are the representation of that visually for the most part. So having the Alt Art version of that was really cool. We actually also pulled just the regular STC Sabo from that same box. So that box was ultimately, as I said, the very best by far compared to any other box we pulled. And I know a lot of people use this in their yellow decks. I don't personally play yellow at this point. I may at some point in the future. It feels like Anel specifically likes using like these high value cards. It's a 10 cost, 10,000 power, so you need to have a lot of Dawn ultimately to play this guy. I'll share the ability for him as well. So on play, add up to 1 card to the top of your deck from the top of your life cards. And then if you have 2 or less life cards, the character gains Rush. So you're adding a card from the top of your deck to the top of your life. So that may prevent rush from happening, but let's say you had only 1 life or no life. You play this, you get a life, and then this guy gets rushed with 10,000 power right off the bat. So that is a very strong card, especially for late game when it comes to an L or any yellow character really in general. Just the ability to hit hard, give you a life, and maybe even hit right away. So that's a very strong power, and overall, probably not a card I'll play with since it's the alt art, but love the visual of Ace there as well. So that comes in at number 4. And coming in at number 3, while we're talking about the yellow deck, and this is one I pulled from OP3. So I did a box opening the other day of OP3. That was the second time I've opened an OP3. The first time I opened one, we got the Charlotte Katakuri. So this is not the alt art, this is just the regular SCC. But this guy I think just looks so cool regardless. He may even look cooler than the alt art. I know the alt art may be more valuable, but love the visuals of this guy. It's super shiny. He's just coming at you at the front of the card and attacking you. I think he's one of the main covers of OP3 as well, just as far as representing that box set. And just love, as I said, the visual of this card. Similar to the Ace, just that really aggressive, like super shiny, in-your-face type card. As far as how this card plays, similarly, I think this is one that gets put in an L decks and yellow decks in general just because of how effective it is. Which is funny because I feel like this card is super valuable, and that may be why maybe in L decks are like super expensive, because you get cards like this where you have to have multiple of, and then you have to have a few different types of these type of cards. I can see that getting pretty pricey, but you have an 8 cost, 8,000 power, and his ability is on play, add up to 1 character with the cost of 8 or less to the top or bottom of the owner's life cards face up. So that is super valuable just because you put him out there. It's similar to the Ace almost. You put him out there, and if you have a character on the board, you can put that character then on your life, which you could put somebody who has a trigger, and then when you get attacked, you can then do whatever, like what that trigger winds up being, which could be putting him back on the board or anything else ultimately. So overall, a very powerful card. This is one that, as I said, this is just a regular SCC, so people do play with this one despite how awesome it looks and my reluctance to probably play with it, but it's definitely one that I've seen people have in their decks and use quite effectively. So that's my number 3. And then number 2, so I talked about I grabbed originally after that OP7. Last week we grabbed an OP1, 2, 3, and 5. That Katakuri was from 3. The big hit from the OP2 box that I wound up getting was the Alt Art Edward Newgate. And this card is just super awesome. Similar to the King, it's that zoomed in version of their face as an Alt Art leader. And the thing I like about Alt Art leaders as well, if you get something that's valuable that you want to keep protected, you can put it in something and still play with it ultimately. I know depending on where you play, there may be rules around what you do. Like I don't think you're playing with a big slab or anything like that, but if you put this guy in this, I think you should be fine playing with him because you obviously don't have him in your full deck. You can keep him in something a little bit nicer and still ultimately play with him. But this card seems awesome. I've been playing Red Zoro and I don't have the best deck for him. I have relatively basic cards with it. Edward Newgate's one that I considered at one point just because he feels like he's got a cool power to him. I think he was even temporarily banned at one point in the past, and I think Moby Dick from his OP2 box did wind up getting banned, so that card somewhat nerfed him. So I'm sure that may be why he's not played as often, but overall he just feels like a cool ability and may have good synergy with the Whitebeard Pirates. So he has a 6,000 power. There's not a whole lot of leaders that I know of that have 6,000 power just right off the bat, and 6 life. So more power, more life than your typical leader. And his ability is at the end of your turn, add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand. So that's somewhat of the, well, that's a value for him. That's why he's able to have 6 life and 6,000 power, because those things are helping him attack, but his ability is not something that helps him attack. So it's a ability that is effective, but it balances out a little bit of his power as well. So as I said, just love the look of him and the Whitebeard Pirate leader. I'm not, as I said, this part of the anime I haven't seen yet, but I imagine when I get to him, he's going to be super cool, and just love that visual of the zoomed in face version of that card as well. Maybe I got the regular version of him in OP2 as well, so possible at some point in the future I'll play with him, but regardless for now, just love the alt art version of my collection. Now, coming in at number 1, and this is by far number 1, and there's a funny story with this one. So I mentioned at the beginning that The very first time I got into the One Piece card game, we picked up some starter decks, came home, played with them, really enjoyed the game, so went back and picked up a couple more starter decks and grabbed a box of OP7. So my very first box I ever opened was of OP7. I didn't fully know what good cards were there. I did some light research. I knew the Ace and Sabo were valuable, and I had seen Boa Hancock is the #1 valuable card. And I was vaguely familiar with mangas being the thing, and that's an example of one. So you probably are familiar, but if you're not, the most valuable cards in the game as far as like collecting are the mangas, and they are the versions of cards that have manga panels with a kind of silver texture to them in the background. So those are typically the most valuable. There's normally only one per box set. The OP5 does have 3, and I think that Monkey D. Luffy is the most valuable card. I think it's like $3,000 or something. But regardless, I knew a little bit about it, and when I was opening packs, I get to the last card and ultimately see a Boa Hancock. And I'm there with my wife, and she's like looking up some of these cards we pulled. She's checking the value of, just out of curiosity, on TCG Player. Most of them are showing up as being like 1 cent, so it's like, wow, okay, this... I'm not sure the value of these is there. Obviously, I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it to play and for the fun of opening the box as well. But it felt like a lot of them were like, maybe not. And then we get to the Boa Hancock, and I open that up, and I'm like, I think we got the most valuable card in the box. And my wife, not necessarily realizing how much I had familiarity with it, she was, I think, trying to temper my expectations, being like, okay, just it's probably not. I think not wanting to get overhyped for it and then be let down. There's no way that you pulled that. And she types it in, and sure enough, we pulled the manga Boa Hancock. And this is definitely the most valuable, but also the coolest card in my collection. Just as you can see, as I mentioned, the manga panels in the background, where you can see some from the manga there, and just a cool addition. And that probably set me up to be overhyped for these boxes in general, because as I said, this was the very first box I opened, which is extremely unrealistic to expect that going forward. You have people open up tons of cases of these with like 30 different boxes and not get a manga. And for us to get it on our very first pull was incredible. And as I said, I've since then probably gone into opening boxes with higher expectations than I should. So the last few have definitely tempered that back a little bit. But from the very first one, that was an awesome pull. Maybe I should have stopped there, but was super fun regardless. I will share her ability. I don't think it's necessarily as great as some of the other ones, but we'll take a look. And this is a blue card, 6 cost, 8,000 power, and on play, up to one of your opponent's characters, other than Monkey D. Luffy, cannot attack till the end of your opponent's next turn. Then place up to 1 character with the cost of 1 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. Okay, that's actually not the worst ability. Obviously, I'm not going to play with this card specifically, but the original card may be worth it. So you're playing your card, and then up to one of your characters can't attack till the end of your opponent's next turn. If your life is really low and you want to prevent them from hitting you a lot, you can definitely play that. And then you can place 1 character with the cost of 1 or less at the bottom of the owner's deck. So maybe they have like a 1 cost Tony Chopper blocker like I put in my deck, and you can send that to the bottom and ultimately rest somebody else. So that's taking 2 bodies out of the equation if you can optimize it. So actually a cool card to have if you play the original or the main card. Could be worth having in your deck, but either way, the manga is cool to have in the collection, and as I said, that is my #1 at this point in time. I have struck out in comparison to that since then, but have gotten some other cool ones that we shared today. But as I said at the beginning of the video, would love to see your comments down below. What are your top 5 cards? What are some fun experiences like the one I just described, where the very first box we ever opened, we got the Boa Hancock manga? Anything like that, would love to hear your thoughts there. So appreciate you guys so much for watching, and hope to talk to you again soon.